What is going on YouTube? I have another guerrilla style video for you, sitting here at my desk doing some work and fondling these two knives here. We've got a Strider SMF. This is a really cool one with the contrasting blade here. The dark flats with the hand ground built finish grind right there, beautiful. Then we got my St. Patty's Day Commander. Really like this one, but I was taking a look at this Strider here, kind of thinking about knives like I usually do. Sorry for the poor lighting, by the way. I thought it would actually be a little bit better in here, but we'll see how it turns out. I was thinking about this knife and just, you know, kind of the contribution of Strider, Mixed Strider to the knife community, the things that they did that were really cool. And I think some of the stuff that they did that's still cool and kind of is a testament to how they've lasted as long as they have. I think some people overlook some of the contributions of Strider knives. And part of it is they just don't really acknowledge it or think about it. And B, I think a lot of the things Strider knives did for the knife community design is just so well incorporated that you don't realize that they didn't really exist before, or at least they weren't as popular as before. So how do I want to structure this? We're going to say Strider knives, right? They're kind of, if you're not familiar with them and you're newer to the knife community, and by newer I mean maybe you haven't been around in the last 20 years or so, you're kind of relatively new, you probably think of them as somewhat outdated, overbuilt, tanky military style knives, which is true. However, there's a few secrets to these knives. One of the things, and maybe the SNG gunner grip that I have would be a better example of this. I'm going to talk about it. But one of the things, when I show people a Strider knife, especially if it's like an SNG, and they're not familiar with Striders, maybe they haven't held them, you know, people I run into or meetups or whatever, and they're not that familiar with Striders, they've never held one. One of the first things that they always note is they're blown away about how light it is. And like I said, this isn't the best example. This is a tank of a knife. This is an SMF with a 3/4 grind blade, kind of the heaviest duty version you can get, all metal. But if you get a flat ground like gunner grip or Hatch G10 size style SNG, it's very light for how big it is. And I think that blows a lot of people away because they kind of just think, oh, Strider knives, super overbuilt, crazy heavy, ridiculous knives, and they're actually not. And they do that a couple of different ways. Strider really put a lot of thought into their design, right? So they've got this really thick stock blade and they've got this thick frame lock, but they make sure and distill it down. I'm trying to formulate my words here. They really distill it down to why they're choosing these things, right? So they choose the thick stock blade to increase overall strength, increase the tip of that blade there, so that it doesn't snap off, doesn't break, doesn't bend, things like that. However, they're not trying to hit you over the head with how thick that stock is, right? They don't want it to be heavy. Some makers go for the overbuilt thing, and they want you to know that this knife is overbuilt. Has super thick blade, really chunky grind on it. Strider says, well, let's use the properties of the thick stock, but let's try to minimize the downside. So they oftentimes, and especially originally, would do a full flat grind on the blade, and so they'd reduce a lot of weight. Going with the spider hole, they would reduce a lot of weight, and there's other reasons why that's cool as well too. Same with the handle, right? So they have this fairly thick titanium lock side, but they're not going for a 2x4 size. They shrink it down here width-wise to try to minimize the amount of material that they're using. They also cut out a lot of material on this front scale. They use G10 or aluminum, which is fairly light. There's a reason that the standard production knives weren't full titanium or full metal. They do a lot of things to kind of keep the strength, capacity, and accentuate the materials that they're using without making it ridiculous, I guess, if that makes sense, while reducing the downsides. So my point is that when people handle Striders, they are usually very surprised at the weight. Now, I'm not saying these are super lightweight knives, right? But considering the reputation of the hard use, considering their capability and how strong they are, they're way lighter than I think most people or a lot of people think they'll be. And that is pretty cool for them to do that. The other thing I wanted to point out, sorry, I got distracted there for a second, is the design principle of minimalism, right? And here's the main point of the video that I wanted to kind of point out. Striders are designed to be as minimal as possible, as few pieces as possible. Probably the biggest example of that is this front scale that is one piece. It's always one piece unless it's the Performance Series or a custom. Traditional Striders are always one piece, either aluminum or G10. So this is a thick chunk. I mean, look how thick that chunk of aluminum is. And then they mill out this entire front pocket here. So not efficient in terms of cost, right? It'd be way cheaper to do a sandwich style construction where it's a thinner stock of aluminum and it has a backspacer or standoffs similar to this Emerson here. Way cheaper. And in fact, a lot of companies actually modify knife designs to make it cheaper to manufacture. For example, they may look at this and say, well, we want thick blade stock, but if we go thinner blade stock, it's the same price for the blade, but if we go thinner blade stock, that means the overall profile will be thinner and we can actually use the same material for the front scale and the backspacer, and we can cut costs way down. So they'll actually tweak the knife design to make it easier to manufacture and cheaper to manufacture. Strider doesn't do that. They have their design principles on what they wanted to make, which is really strong, light as possible for keeping it really strong, and then keeping all the parts super, super minimal. And the price be damned. You know, the price is what it is. And that's part of the reason why Striders have always been kind of expensive, because they don't do ease of manufacture. They waste a lot of material when they're manufacturing these front scales and other parts. It's not the most efficient knife you can make from a manufacturing standpoint. And that's always been kind of reflected in the price, amongst a bunch of other things, right? Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that that accounts for all of the price of Strider. A lot of factors that go into that. But the main point of this video I wanted to point out was the reduction in number of parts and components of this knife. And I think that's exemplified with this particular knife here. Because the old school aluminum front scaled versions actually had the screws coming in the show side, and then it had the usual little captured rings that were knurled that would come in on the titanium here. And with these newer ones, they have simplified it even more, and all there are is 4 screws. So if we compare these two knives parts, the Strider, the SMF, has 14 parts total. 14 parts total. You got the blade, you've got 2 washers, you've got 2 sides of the pivot, you've got this front scale, you've got 4 screws on the body, 1 screw on the pocket clip, you've got the over travel and the screw here, and then you got the titanium lock side. So 14 total pieces. One of the cool things, and probably the best example of the reduction of parts, is this pocket clip here. So traditionally, you're going to want at least 2 points of contact for a pocket clip to keep it from spinning. And as you can see, this Emerson here has 3 screws. That's a lot of parts. 3 screws and a pocket clip, 4 total. Strider said, well, how do we change that? We only want 1 screw. And they came up with this really cool concept. I don't hear as many people talking about it, but it's really pretty neat. They drill a hole into the titanium side here, and then they bend a little tab. That's 1 point of contact, and then you have the screw with a total of 2 parts only, creating a very secure pocket clip. So conversely, the Emerson, I believe, I had my numbers pulled up on my computer because I counted them all up, and then my computer just went to sleep, and now I can't see it. I believe there are 26 or 27 parts on this knife. 14 to 26. That's a lot of extra parts. You've got the thumb stud, in this case, is a disc with a screw. On the Strider, it's a spider hole, so no parts. The stop pin on this is a floating stop pin, so you have a stop pin in there that's separate from the whole knife. The Strider has an integral stop pin in the blade, so no extra part. Pivot's the same, washers are the same. The front scale here is a single construction front scale. The equivalent on this one is you've got the scale, you've got the liner, you've got standoffs, and on this side you've got 4 screws. And in order for the standoffs to work, you need 4 screws on this side. Lock side is all one piece, frame lock. On this one it's 2 pieces, liner lock and scale. Now the Strider does have to have an over travel disc and screw, whereas the Emerson, because it's a liner lock, you don't have that problem, don't need that. Then of course you've got the pocket clip that we already talked about, how it's 4 pieces here and just 2 pieces there. And honestly, the Emerson isn't, I don't think most people would consider this over-engineered or over-parted, right? It's really got as minimal amount of parts as you could do, with the exception of maybe you could ditch a standoff or 2, maybe just 1. Everything else would be difficult to get away from without severely modifying the overall design, right? Obviously, you could ditch the disc and do a hole on this, but then that's not really an Emerson. So it's really kind of cool how Strider did that. That was always kind of their focus, and just something that I think about and find really, really cool that they did on these knives, kind of the simplicity of these things. And they also really executed the whole military concept, and I think it kind of fits in with that. When we say military, I mean true like military gear, right? As simple as it can be, as strong as it needs to be, nothing more, nothing less, right? Nothing fancy, no extra parts that aren't needed. Everything has a purpose, everything has a point, everything is done with thought behind it on this knife. And I'm talking, you know, your base Striders, right? Obviously, there's some funky ones. You've got some lasering and you've got customs. But your base Strider is meant to be super strong, as light as possible for that strength, and have as few parts and as few accents as needed for the knife to function as intended. And I think that kind of simplicity of design language really has allowed it to hold the test of time. In my opinion. All right, guys, couple knife thoughts on St. Patrick's Day. Not sure when this video is going to go up, though, but that's why I have this one out. I'm going to carry this today. But catch you guys later. See you on the next one.